Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The rivalry between Harry and Draco is one of the most striking storylines in the entire saga, but here's the catch. The film adaptations changed or even completely removed the scenes that made this feud sharper and deeper. Which movie moments turned out nothing like in the books? Let's find out. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Draco pretended to be a Dementor to scare Harry. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Quidditch played a huge role. The book had 3 full matches, but the movie showed only the first, the one where real Dementors appeared. Knowing Harry's fears, Malfoy and his cronies decided to go further. At the next match, they disguised themselves as Dementors, hoping to make Harry fall off his broom. But Draco clearly didn't expect that Harry had already been training the Patronus charm. Harry immediately attacked the Dementors and caught the snitch with ease. Result: Malfoy was humiliated, his plan failed, Gryffindor lost only a few seconds, while Slytherin lost 50 points. Number 2. Harry saw Draco in Knockturn Alley. In the Chamber of Secrets, Harry accidentally ended up in Knockturn Alley, a sinister counterpart to Diagon Alley. The movie skipped over many details, but the book gave us an extra encounter. Harry spotted Draco and Lucius Malfoy inside Borgin and Burke's. Though it wasn't a direct confrontation, this moment left a strong impression on Harry. He remembered Draco's words and behavior, returning to them later while trying to uncover the secret of the heir of Slytherin. Number 3. The Quidditch World Cup. The film adaptation of The Goblet of Fire cut one of the most atmospheric events, the Quidditch World Cup. In the book, we see the preparations, the actual match, and the chaos that followed. When the Death Eaters rioted and tormented Muggles, Draco didn't even bother hiding his enjoyment. He openly mocked Harry, Ron, and Hermione, with particular cruelty toward Hermione's Muggle-born status. It was an important detail in shaping his character, one that the film simply erased. Number 4. Draco was Rita Skeeter's informant. Rita Skeeter was a major problem for Harry in The Goblet of Fire. But the movies showed her only superficially. They skipped over the fact that she was an unregistered animagus and never revealed her source. It was Draco who supplied her with snide remarks and gossip. For him, it was a way to humiliate Harry indirectly, making him look ridiculous and pathetic in the eyes of the wizarding world. Number 5. The first match in the Order of the Phoenix. The Order of the Phoenix was the longest book, but ironically, its movie adaptation was the shortest. A lot was cut, including Harry's role as captain of the Quidditch team. In the book, Harry won his very first match as captain. Malfoy, unable to accept the loss, insulted Harry's parents and the Weasley family in the crudest way. In response, Harry and George attacked him physically. Dolores Umbridge then punished them harshly. Both, along with Fred, were banned from the team. Number 6. Draco challenged Harry to a duel and never showed up. One of the first tests of Harry and Ron's friendship. Malfoy challenged Harry to a wizard's duel, setting the meeting for midnight. Harry and Ron showed up, but Draco never did. It turned out to be a trap. Malfoy had hoped Filch would catch them and drag them to Dumbledore, leading to expulsion. Luckily, the plan failed, but this episode clearly showed Draco's tendency to scheme in the shadows rather than fight openly. Number 7. The First Encounter. The books and movies presented Harry and Draco's first meeting differently. In The Sorcerer's Stone, the movie placed Draco already inside Hogwarts just before the sorting ceremony. There he sneered at Ron, and the enmity began. But in the book, the story unfolded differently. Their first crossing happened in Diagon Alley, where the boys exchanged a few words. The real introduction came later, on the train. Draco offered Harry his friendship, but when he insulted Ron, Harry rejected him sharply. That moment became the point of no return, the true beginning of their long rivalry. Number 8. The Gryffindor broomstick sabotage. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco's schemes didn't stop at secret missions for Voldemort. On the Quidditch field, he returned to his old tricks. During one Gryffindor practice, Harry and Ron found their brooms missing, only to discover them dumped behind the castle with a sticky hex smeared across the handles. Another time, a snake slithered across the pitch mid-flight, sending Katie Bell screaming and nearly causing a crash. Malfoy leaned against the stands, laughing with Crabbe and Goyle, pretending it was all coincidence. Harry knew better. These weren't childish pranks anymore. They were attempts to rattle him before the season's biggest match. "You'll never catch the snitch with your broom stuck to your hands, Potter," Draco shouted once, his smirk flashing across the field. The sabotage never worked, but it left a mark. Every time Harry mounted his broom, he wondered what Malfoy had planned next. The films ignored this side of their rivalry, but in the book it made the tension sharper. Quidditch wasn't just a game, it was another battlefield where Draco tried and failed to break him. Number 9. Draco's secret meetings in Half-Blood Prince. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco's behavior shifted from arrogance to secrecy. Harry noticed him disappearing at odd hours, his face pale and drawn, often slipping into the room of requirement. Convinced Draco had become a Death Eater, Harry tried to warn others, but no one believed him. Even Ron rolled his eyes, and Hermione told him he was seeing Death Eaters behind every broomstick. But Harry's instincts were sharp. He had seen Draco whispering in corners, pulling Crabbe and Goyle into strange errands, and his unease grew heavier with each passing week. One of the most telling moments came on the Hogwarts Express. Before Harry was caught, he overheard Draco bragging to his friends, "You know what I've got to do. It's not child's play. If I succeed, I'll be more important than Father ever was." The words chilled Harry. This wasn't the voice of a school rival anymore. It was the voice of a boy drowning under the weight of Voldemort's command. The secret meetings, the furtive looks, and the late nights in the castle were threads Harry couldn't quite piece together, but he knew the danger was real. The film skimmed over these details, showing only fragments of Draco's torment. But in the book, his hidden mission gave their rivalry a darker edge. Harry wasn't just fighting a bully, he was trying to uncover a plot that could destroy the school. Each secret meeting, each hushed conversation that Draco held in the shadows, pushed their conflict into a new realm. It was no longer a matter of Quidditch or insults. It was a matter of life, loyalty, and betrayal. Number 10. The train confrontation in Half-Blood Prince. On the train ride back to Hogwarts in Half-Blood Prince, Harry made the dangerous choice to shadow Draco under his invisibility cloak. He was certain Malfoy was up to something dark, and his suspicion grew as Draco slipped away from his friends to join the Slytherins in a private compartment. But Harry underestimated him. Malfoy sensed the disturbance and with sudden precision fired a spell. Petrificus totalis. Draco's voice rang out and Harry collapsed, frozen, his nose smashing painfully against the floor. Draco stood over him, no trace of schoolboy rivalry left. "Enjoy your trip back, Potter," he said coldly, before kicking him aside. Then, with calculated cruelty, he broke Harry's nose and dragged his limp body into the luggage rack, leaving him hidden like discarded baggage. For a boy once known for childish taunts, this was a shocking act of violence. Harry could only lie helpless, seething with humiliation, while the train thundered on toward Hogwarts. It was Luna Lovegood who saved him. She found Harry in the compartment, bloodied and immobilized, and calmly freed him with a simple charm. Her kindness stood in stark contrast to Draco's brutality. This scene, cut entirely from the films, was crucial in the book. It showed just how far Malfoy had stepped away from schoolyard games and into something far darker. He was no longer simply Harry's rival. He was becoming a true enemy willing to leave him broken and hidden, forgotten by everyone else. Number 11. The Astronomy Tower Conflict. On the night in the astronomy tower, Harry followed Dumbledore back to the castle, only to be frozen under the invisibility cloak by a spell from his own headmaster. Forced into silence, he became a hidden witness to Draco Malfoy's moment of truth. Draco entered, wand shaking, his face pale. He had been ordered to kill Dumbledore, and for the first time Harry saw not arrogance, but terror. "I've got to do it, or he'll kill me," Draco whispered, his voice breaking. Dumbledore did not raise his wand. Instead, he spoke gently, urging Draco to lower his weapon. "You are not a killer, Draco. It is not too late." The words struck like a blow, because Draco's hand trembled harder with every second. Harry, burning with the desire to act, remained paralyzed, forced to watch the boy he had always called his enemy, standing on the edge of a choice that could not be undone. The tension stretched unbearably. Draco admitted he had repaired the vanishing cabinet, that Death Eaters were already in the castle. Yet when it came to the final step, he faltered. He could not say the curse. Harry saw it in his eyes. Malfoy wanted to be loyal to Voldemort, to prove himself, but the weight of murder was more than he could bear. For the first time, Harry understood that Draco's cruelty at school had been a mask hiding fear and pressure from a family bound to the Dark Lord. In the film, this inner conflict was flattened, shortened into a few lines and a rush of action. But the book lingered on Draco's trembling wand and the sweat running down his face. It turned the scene from a simple confrontation into a study of weakness and humanity. Harry's greatest rival was revealed not as a villain, but as a frightened boy caught between duty and conscience. That night on the astronomy tower, their rivalry shifted. It was no longer about insults or Quidditch. It was about survival and the crushing weight of choice. Number 12. The final encounters in Deathly Hallows. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Harry found himself face to face with Draco in one of the most dangerous moments of the war. In the Room of Requirement, Draco, Crabbe and Goyle cornered him, Ron and Hermione. The place had transformed into a towering labyrinth of hidden objects, a perfect trap. Draco shouted across the chaos, "You're not leaving here, Potter!" But his voice cracked with more fear than triumph. What followed was not a duel between rivals, but a desperate scramble for survival. It was Crabbe who unleashed the cursed Fiendfire, a spell far beyond his control. The fire roared into a monstrous inferno, devouring everything in its path. The flames twisted into shapes of beasts, shrieking as they burned. Draco panicked. He scrambled across the piles of junk, screaming for help as the cursed fire closed in. In that instant, Harry made his choice. With no hesitation, he pulled Draco onto his broom, saving his life. He didn't pause to weigh the history of insults, the duels, or the taunts. He simply acted. Later, when the survivors regrouped, Harry caught sight of Draco again. He was pale, shaken, and clinging to his mother in the Great Hall. There was no sneer, no smirk, just a boy who had seen death too closely. The book makes it clear that Draco was torn apart by fear and by the crushing weight of his family's loyalty to Voldemort. Harry watched him, not with hatred, but with a strange understanding. The rivalry that had defined their years at Hogwarts no longer mattered. The films reduced this to a fleeting moment, but in the book, it was a turning point. The rescue in the burning Room of Requirement was not about Gryffindor versus Slytherin anymore. It was about mercy in the middle of war. Harry saving Draco symbolized the end of their battle, not with curses, but with an act of compassion. It wasn't a victory or defeat. It was something more fragile, a quiet truce in the shadow of tragedy. Number 13. The meeting at St. Mungo's Hospital. At St. Mungo's Hospital, the atmosphere was tense and heavy. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had come to see Arthur Weasley after the snake attack, still shaken by what had happened. As they moved through the crowded hallways, they suddenly crossed paths with the Malfoys. It was a jarring moment. Two families who stood on opposite sides of the war, meeting not at school, but in the real world, where the stakes were life and death. Lucius Malfoy's presence filled the corridor. Tall, cold, with his silver-topped cane, he barely glanced at the Weasleys except with disdain. Narcissa stood close to him, elegant and distant, her eyes betraying little. And then there was Draco, who looked at Harry with a familiar sneer. But this wasn't like mocking in the common room or on the Quidditch pitch. Here, surrounded by injured wizards and anxious families, his words carried more weight. "So, even hospitals are filled with blood traitors these days," Draco muttered, his voice sharp enough to cut. Ron's fists tightened instantly. Hermione's face flushed, but she said nothing, standing stiff at Harry's side. For Harry, the insult wasn't just about Ron or Arthur. It was about everything the Malfoys represented. One family was bleeding for the fight against Voldemort, the other funding his rise from the shadows. Harry stared back at Draco, their eyes locking, and for a moment, the hospital corridor felt like a battlefield where no spells had yet been cast. The clash ended quickly as Lucius placed a hand on Draco's shoulder and steered him away with a low warning. But the message lingered. This was not schoolyard rivalry anymore. This was war reflected in two boys who had been enemies since their first day at Hogwarts. The films cut this meeting entirely, but the book used it to sharpen the contrast. Harry's world was built on loyalty and sacrifice, while Draco's was rooted in arrogance and fear. At St. Mungo's, their conflict grew darker, heavier, and far more real. Number 14. The post-exam clash after OWLs. The exams were finally over, but the tension inside the castle did not ease. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stepped out into the corridor, still buzzing about the written defense against the dark arts test. That was when they ran into Draco Malfoy. He was not alone, of course. Crabbe and Goyle flanked him as usual, and Pansy Parkinson lingered nearby, already smirking. Draco's pale face lit up with delight at the sight of them. He never missed an opportunity to twist the knife, especially when the teachers were not watching. Malfoy's words cut sharper than a spell. He sneered at Hermione, dragging out the word mudblood with a cruel smile. Then he turned his attention to Neville, mocking his fumbling in class, saying he was the shame of Gryffindor. The insult hit hard. Neville flushed red and clenched his fists. Hermione tried to pull him back, whispering, "Don't let him get to you." But Draco only laughed, adding, "It must be difficult, Potter, being surrounded by such pathetic friends." The corridor bristled with tension, and wands began to slip into hands. Harry felt the heat rise in his chest. He had heard Malfoy's venom for years, but this time, after the stress of the OWLs, it was unbearable. He pulled his wand free, ready to hex him, and Ron mirrored his movement. Crabbe and Goyle stepped forward, cracking their knuckles, eager for a fight. For a heartbeat, the world held still. They were inches away from letting spells fly, Gryffindor and Slytherin ready to clash right there in the hall. "Go on then, Potter," Draco taunted. "Show us your famous heroics." His voice dripped with poison, and Harry raised his wand higher. The duel never came. A sharp voice rang down the corridor. "What is going on here?" Professor McGonagall swept into view, her eyes flashing like steel. Behind her, Snape appeared, his expression already calculating. Wands were lowered, but the hostility did not fade. The professors separated the groups before a single spell was cast. Still, the message was clear. The rivalry between Harry and Draco was no longer child's play. It had grown darker, sharper, and more dangerous with each passing year. The books capture that rising hostility perfectly, but the films left this powder keg moment in the shadows. Number 15, the Slytherin common room confrontation. Of all the tense moments between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy, there is one that the films chose to simplify, leaving much of its sharpness off-screen. The visit to the Slytherin common room in the Chamber of Secrets is remembered for its clever disguise through Polyjuice Potion, but what the book reveals is far darker and far more telling about the animosity between Harry and Draco. Hidden behind the masks of Crabbe and Goyle, Harry and Ron stepped into a world of green lamplight, stone walls, and smug pride. It was an infiltration with a purpose, but what unfolded was an almost unspoken duel, a moment when tempers nearly exploded into wildfire, and when Harry, even under disguise, was close to drawing his wand against his rival. The common room itself was a character in that scene, the lake waters casting shifting shadows through high windows, the air heavy with arrogance, and students lounging like young aristocrats who believed the world already belonged to them. It was here that Harry heard Malfoy speak freely, not tempered by the presence of teachers or outsiders. In the film, Draco's words are reduced to simple sneers and passing comments. In the book, however, J.K. Rowling allows Draco's cruelty to unfold fully, every sentence dripping with disdain for Muggle-borns. When he spat the word mudblood, it was not an insult thrown in passing. It was a weapon, a declaration of who he was and what he believed. For Harry, disguised as Goyle, it was unbearable. His fists clenched, his heartbeat thundered, and for a moment the disguise meant nothing. What mattered was that his enemy, the boy who had insulted Hermione so many times, was sitting in front of him, mocking, laughing, and celebrating cruelty as if it were a form of wit. The book paints the moment vividly, reminding the reader that Harry's hatred for Malfoy was not simply rivalry on the Quidditch pitch or childish name-calling. It was deeper, sharper, rooted in justice and loyalty to his friends. At one point, Rowling writes, Harry was so close to pulling out his wand, to hexing Malfoy where he sat, that he had to dig his nails into his palm to stop himself. It was not just a thought, it was an instinct that had to be fought back. This unspoken, almost duel matters because it reveals Harry's vulnerability to anger. Up until this point, his encounters with Malfoy were heated but controlled by circumstance. Duels stopped by teachers, insults answered with words. In the common room, though, there was no Dumbledore, no Snape, no McGonagall. There was only the disguise, the risk, and the surge of anger that could have blown it all apart. If Harry had drawn his wand, if he had let his fury take over, the entire plan to uncover the truth about the Chamber of Secrets could have collapsed. More than that, he and Ron might have been discovered instantly, punished severely, and perhaps expelled. The weight of this restraint shows the quiet discipline Harry had to learn early, even before his formal training caught up to his instincts. The films, in simplifying the encounter, robbed viewers of this dangerous closeness to violence. Malfoy in the movie delivers information with arrogance, yes, but without the venom that might justify Harry's fury. Without that venom, the scene becomes merely exposition, a stepping stone to the next mystery. But in the book, it is far more than that. It is a crucible, testing whether Harry can restrain himself for the greater goal, or whether Malfoy's insults will finally ignite the first real duel between them. The tension is electric, built line by line until Harry has to force himself back into his disguise, swallowing rage for the sake of the mission. One must remember the stakes. Draco in this moment was not simply mocking. He was speaking about the Chamber of Secrets, about the heir of Slytherin, about the danger stalking the school. He gloated in ignorance, claiming he wished he knew who the heir was, declaring that he would help them rid the school of mudbloods if only he could. These words are chilling because they show the real depth of his indoctrination, his acceptance of dark ideology. To Harry, hearing Draco speak this way was more than an insult. It was a window into a heart already corrupted, a boy only 12 but already poisoned with hatred. In such a moment, it is understandable that Harry nearly lost control. It is easy to forget that Harry at 12 was still learning who he was. He had not yet faced the Dementors, had not yet borne the weight of Cedric Diggory's death, had not yet fought in the graveyard of Little Hangleton. But here, in the cold underbelly of Hogwarts, he came close to a line he would cross many times in the future. The almost duel with Malfoy foreshadows the many moments when Harry's anger nearly overpowered him, his rage at Umbridge, his fury at Snape, his loss of control in the Department of Mysteries. This hidden moment is one of the earliest seeds, a reminder that even the hero of the story had to wrestle constantly with his temper and the temptation to lash out. The restraint he showed is also a quiet triumph. It was not flashy magic, not a dramatic victory, but it was discipline, and discipline is often the true mark of growth. Ron by his side might have cracked, for Ron was quicker to anger, especially when Hermione was insulted. But it was Harry who carried the heaviest burden, sitting inches away from Malfoy, biting back every instinct to defend his friend's honor with a hex. Readers can almost feel the burn in his chest as he holds himself still, answering only when necessary, forcing his voice to sound like Goyle's rather than his own. Number 16, Draco, in Umbridge's inquisitorial squad. In the book Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the dynamics between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy take on a darker shade than in previous years at Hogwarts. No longer confined to petty insults in the corridors or childish hexes exchanged behind teachers' backs, their rivalry deepens under the poisonous authority of Dolores Umbridge. The films chose to skim the surface of this enmity, showing Malfoy as a smug Slytherin siding with Umbridge, but omitting the full extent of his actions within the inquisitorial squad. What the movies left behind was the picture of Draco not just as a schoolyard bully, but as an active enforcer of a brutal regime, empowered to punish Harry and his friends under the direct orders of the High Inquisitor herself. Dolores Umbridge's creation of the inquisitorial squad was a turning point. With the blessing of the Ministry, she granted select students sweeping authority to police Hogwarts. This authority came with privileges, docking house points, reporting infractions, and assisting in enforcing her rigid rules. It was here that Draco found his opportunity. Unlike the casual mischief he had enjoyed in previous years, now he was armed with legitimacy. His antagonism toward Harry was no longer the snide pastime of a rival student. It became a sanctioned weapon of control. The book makes it clear that Malfoy relished this newfound role. J.K. Rowling describes how he strutted through the halls, seizing every chance to target Harry and Gryffindor. Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle were enjoying themselves hugely, not least because they could now dock points from Gryffindor. The key moment of Draco's involvement comes during Harry's desperate attempt to use Umbridge's fireplace to contact Sirius Black. In the book, the plan is risky but fueled by urgency, as Harry believes Voldemort may be torturing Sirius in the Department of Mysteries. Together with Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville and Luna, Harry makes his move. Yet it is Malfoy and his fellow inquisitorial squad members who turn the tide. Their ambush in Umbridge's office marks the culmination of Draco's position as more than just a nuisance. Rowling writes, Malfoy and two of the inquisitorial squad had come crashing into the room. They seized hold of Harry and his friends, forcing them back. This moment is vital, as it directly sets in motion the chain of events leading to the disastrous battle in the Ministry of Magic. The punishment that follows is not a minor school detention. In the films, this sequence is largely softened, with little emphasis on the cruelty Harry's group endures at the hands of Draco and the squad. But in the novel, the detail is striking. Harry and his friends are captured, restrained, and subjected to humiliation. Malfoy, with the backing of Umbridge, taunts Harry relentlessly while tightening the group's bonds. Neville, who fights back, receives particular cruelty from Crabbe and Goyle, yet it is Malfoy who directs the squad with a sense of ownership, as if his long years of rivalry with Harry had finally earned a twisted reward. For readers, this punishment carries a weight far beyond detentions or lost points. It is the embodiment of how unchecked authority magnifies school rivalries into genuine danger. Umbridge herself takes the role of tormentor, further demanding that Harry reveal his intentions. When Harry refuses, she threatens him with the Cruciatus Curse, something the films did touch upon, but with far less detail. Yet what the movie avoided showing was the context. Draco's role in delivering Harry to this moment of vulnerability. It is one thing to watch Umbridge's cruelty unfold, but another to realize that Harry's capture, his being pinned, silenced, and handed over, was facilitated by Malfoy's zeal. In the squad, the betrayal here is not subtle. Draco was not a passive observer. He was the student who made sure Harry was not just caught, but subdued. The cruelty of the inquisitorial squad's punishment lies not only in the physical restraint, but in the psychological warfare. Harry's friends are immobilized, forced to endure taunts, jeers, and threats. Luna Lovegood, always a quiet target for ridicule, is mocked openly. Ginny is threatened with further harm if she resists. Ron is bruised and silenced. Yet the chilling part is the joy Malfoy and his squad take in these acts. Rowling underscores this when she notes Malfoy was savouring every moment of Harry's helplessness. This is not the Malfoy of the films, who often looks like a child caught in a game too big for him. This is a teenager reveling in his power, intoxicated by Umbridge's permission to wield authority without conscience. Harry, of course, does not crumble under this punishment. His fury toward Malfoy simmers even as he is restrained. Readers can sense his frustration as much as his anger. He recognizes that Draco is no longer just an irritating rival, he is now an enemy aligned with the Ministry's oppression. This distinction is critical, and it shifts the tone of their rivalry forever. In earlier books, one might have expected a duel in a corridor or a retaliatory prank. Here, the stakes are elevated. The punishment Harry receives is institutionalized cruelty, carried out by a peer who has willingly allied himself with tyranny. Another overlooked detail is how this punishment scene highlights the contrasting loyalties of Hogwarts students. While Draco is eager to serve Umbridge, others, like Neville, refuse to bow to fear. Neville's resistance, though resulting in further suffering, is a mark of bravery. It sharpens the contrast between the two boys. Malfoy, safe behind authority, uses power to humiliate others. Neville, even in pain, demonstrates courage by defying them. Rowling's juxtaposition makes Malfoy's actions more sinister, emphasizing that choices matter even under pressure. The films missed this layer entirely, leaving audiences without the full picture of how Draco actively contributed to Harry's downfall in this critical moment. Number 17, the bathroom duel and Sectum Sempra. Under the dim light of the boys' bathroom at Hogwarts, the moment that defined the rivalry between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy came to life in a way far more unsettling than the films ever allowed. In the sixth book, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the encounter is raw, visceral, and deeply human, stripped of the theatrical flair of cinematic magic. Harry did not enter the bathroom seeking a duel. He followed Draco, suspicious of his activities as a secret servant of Voldemort. What unfolded there was not a schoolyard spat, nor one of the many witty exchanges that peppered their years of enmity, but a violent and unrestrained clash that nearly ended in death. The bathroom was described as echoing and cold, a place of shadows and white tile, and within this mundane setting occurred one of the most shocking events of the entire saga. Harry had long known that Draco was up to something, and his suspicions had grown more obsessive with each passing week. His paranoia reached its peak when he finally cornered Malfoy in this hidden moment of vulnerability. Draco was not with his Slytherin friends or strutting through the corridors with arrogance. He was alone, staring into the mirror, his face pale, his eyes heavy with the burden of his secret mission from Voldemort. The book paints him as almost broken, his white hands clutching either side of the sink, his face contorted with anguish. It is in this vulnerable state that Harry appeared, and instead of a confrontation of words, their bottled tensions erupted violently into a duel. The film adaptation compresses this sequence into a few seconds of flashy spellwork, but the book lingers on the brutality and the sheer chaos of the magic unleashed. Draco, despite his usual bravado, was not eager for the fight, but once provoked, his rage was immediate and vicious. He struck out with curses that hissed and cracked against the tiled walls, and Harry, driven by both adrenaline and suspicion, fought back. For once, this was not a duel in a defense against the dark arts class with rules and teachers overseeing them. This was uncontrolled magic, raw energy spilling out from two boys who had grown into men too quickly. It was, in many ways, the culmination of years of hatred and rivalry, now boiling over in a place where no one else could intervene. But then came the moment that darkened the scene forever, Harry's use of the spell Sectum Sempra. Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword. This single sentence from the book shocks the reader into silence. The horror is not simply in the blood itself, but in the fact that Harry had no idea what the spell would do. He had read it from the margins of the Half-Blood Prince's Potions book, a mysterious incantation scribbled by Snape's younger self. Harry had thought of it as just another weapon, something to gain the upper hand, but in that instant he realized he had wielded something far darker and far more destructive than anything he had ever known. Malfoy collapsed in agony, his body torn open by invisible blades, and the bathroom floor was soon slick with crimson. The film shows blood and panic, but it fails to capture the depth of despair and terror described in Rowling's words. The detail in the book is relentless. Draco is not merely injured, he is on the brink of death. His screams fill the bathroom, and the smell of iron permeates the air as blood gushes uncontrollably. Malfoy was choking, gasping and moaning, blood splattering the tiled floor. For Harry, the realization is instantaneous. This is no longer a schoolyard rivalry or a way to prove himself. He has crossed into dangerous territory where his actions carry lethal consequences. In that moment, Harry is not the triumphant hero, but a horrified boy staring at the results of his recklessness. It is one of the rare times he is confronted with the reality that magic, when misused, can mirror the cruelty of the very enemy he despises. The arrival of Severus Snape transforms the scene into one of desperate urgency. Snape bursts into the bathroom and without hesitation kneels by Draco's side, applying counter-curses and spells with expert precision. There was a gash so deep across Malfoy's chest that Harry expected to see bone. This line forces the reader to imagine the gravity of what Harry has done. Snape's reaction is not only professional, but deeply personal. He is saving Draco, yes, but he is also erasing the damage caused by a spell he himself had invented as a teenager. The irony is bitter and haunting. Harry had used the weapon of the half-blood prince against the son of his enemy, and Snape was now forced to undo his own creation. What makes this moment resonate so strongly is not just the gore or the danger, but the moral weight it drops upon Harry. The film offers a glimpse of regret, but the book traps Harry in the heavy silence of guilt. He does not merely fear punishment. He is tormented by the thought that he could have killed Draco. The rivalry that had once been a game of insults and Quidditch fouls now feels trivial compared to the near-death experience in that bathroom. Harry is shaken, trembling as he watches Snape heal Draco's wounds, realizing how close he has come to committing an unforgivable act. The enemy he had chased and hated was lying broken before him, vulnerable and bleeding. Number 18. Rivalry in Potions class. In the shadowed dungeons of Hogwarts, where the air smelled of damp stone and the simmering bitterness of old ingredients, Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy's rivalry took on one of its sharpest edges. The films captured their duels in Quidditch, their verbal clashes in the corridors, and the iconic duel of wands, yet one battlefield was largely neglected on screen, the simmering hostility during Professor Snape's potions lessons. Here, in the dim light of flickering candles, Draco found his most fertile ground for taunting Harry, aided by Snape's ever-present favoritism toward Slytherin. What the films glossed over, the books revealed in painstaking detail, class after class of small humiliations, poisonous remarks, and a constant undermining of Gryffindor pride that deepened their enmity. The very first potions class set the tone. Draco did not need to speak loudly. His sneers and perfectly timed whispers carried far enough. Snape had already turned the room against Harry with his sharp questions and biting remarks, asking him things like, "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry, still reeling from his introduction to the wizarding world, had no chance to impress. Malfoy, of course, basked in the moment. Rowling writes, Malfoy was on the edge of his seat smirking, ready to pounce the second Harry stumbled. For Draco, potions was not just another subject. It was an arena where he could use Snape's bias as a weapon, ensuring that Harry's mistakes became spectacles and that Gryffindor's reputation took the blow. From that day forward, the pattern repeated. Whenever Snape moved silently through the rows of cauldrons, black robes billowing, Malfoy would whisper to Crabbe and Goyle, making sure Harry overheard. The barbs were calculated. He would mutter about Harry's lack of magical upbringing, about his muggle relatives, about his fame being undeserved. "St. Potter doesn't even know a bezoar from a billywig," Draco would sneer in the shadows, waiting for Snape's inevitable scowl to confirm his words. Even when Harry did well, Draco found ways to twist the moment, accusing him of cheating or of receiving secret help. These small daggers cut deeper than outright confrontations, for they happened in the presence of their classmates, leaving Harry cornered and defensive. What makes these lessons so crucial is that they were constant. Unlike duels that erupted once in a while, potions class came week after week, a cycle of quiet hostility. Gryffindors dreaded Snape's cruelty, but Harry faced the double burden of both teacher and rival. Malfoy exploited this, whispering comments just loud enough to be overheard, waiting for Harry's reaction. Once, when Neville Longbottom melted his cauldron, Draco chuckled loudly and said, "Maybe Potter should help him, since he knows so much about exploding." Snape seized the excuse to remove points from Gryffindor, and Draco's smirk widened. For him, potions was less about learning and more about creating opportunities for Gryffindor humiliation. Rowling often used these classroom moments to underline Malfoy's particular brand of cunning cruelty. While Quidditch or hallway confrontations revealed his arrogance, potions revealed his calculated patience. He did not always seek to strike Harry directly. Instead, he tried to provoke him into a misstep, knowing Snape would punish him. One telling line appears in the Chamber of Secrets, when Draco, after making a pointed comment about Harry's fame, glanced sideways at Snape, waiting for approval. That glance says it all. Malfoy knew Snape was his ally, and the dungeon atmosphere gave him cover to torment Harry without fear of reprisal. One striking example comes in The Prisoner of Azkaban. When the news of Sirius Black's escape had the whole school whispering, Draco leaned across his desk during potions and hissed about Harry's parents, mocking their deaths. Rowling notes that Malfoy's pale, pointed face was twisted in a malicious grin. Harry's anger boiled, but Snape's hawk-like presence kept him frozen. The films showed Draco mocking Harry in the corridors, but they never lingered on the claustrophobic cruelty of these dungeon moments, where Harry had no room to fight back and no defense against the constant erosion of his dignity. Even Hermione, who always excelled, was not safe from Draco's poison in this environment. Her quick answers and precise brewing made her Snape's target as well, and Malfoy took every chance to make sure she felt isolated. "Know it all," he would whisper, though it was clear he envied her skill. By extension, he tried to paint Harry as her inferior shadow, someone who needed her guidance just to survive class. The trio's dynamic was tested here more than once, with Draco positioning himself as the superior student in Snape's eyes, and Harry the incompetent imposter. The films, in simplifying the rivalry, stripped away this layered tension. Another moment that books highlight, but the films omit, is Malfoy's opportunism when potions went wrong. In the Goblet of Fire, when Harry's potion bubbled incorrectly, Draco muttered that perhaps Potter was hoping for extra attention. He used the accidents as ammunition, knowing Snape would side with him. This constant chorus of sneers, whispers, and raised eyebrows might seem trivial compared to the grand battles of wands and prophecy, but in the daily rhythm of school life, it was suffocating. Harry's frustration grew in these moments, shaping his hatred of Malfoy as something not just rooted in big confrontations, but in the steady drip of malice that made every lesson a trial. What makes these omissions in the film significant is that they removed an entire texture of Harry and Draco's rivalry. On screen, their conflict looked like isolated events, duels, insults, and Quidditch rivalries. In the books, however, Potion's class was a crucible that reforged their hatred week after week. It was not about single explosions of anger, but about enduring the constant erosion of respect under Snape's watch. Without these moments, viewers miss how deeply Malfoy's antagonism was woven into Harry's daily existence. One can see Rowling's craftsmanship in the way she made Potion's lessons reflect larger themes. Draco's behavior there mirrored the prejudice of his family, his disdain for Muggleborns, his need to assert superiority, his reliance on authority figures to back him up. In the dungeons, he rehearsed the same methods his father used in the Ministry: manipulation, favoritism, and cruelty masked by wit. Harry, in turn, learned patience, resilience, and how to endure injustice without always striking back. These were lessons that prepared him for greater battles, but they came at the cost of countless humiliations, largely invisible to the film audience. Consider the incident in The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry used the textbook filled with the mysterious notes of the Half-Blood Prince. Suddenly, he excelled at potions, leaving even Hermione behind. Malfoy's resentment in class grew palpable. He could no longer claim Harry was inept, and his sneers took on a sharper edge. He muttered that Harry must be cheating, echoing his earlier tactics, but with more desperation. This shift was crucial in showing how Malfoy's sense of superiority faltered when Harry surpassed him in Snape's own field. The film skipped this arc almost entirely, robbing viewers of a deeper understanding of their rivalry. It is also worth remembering how often Malfoy's comments during potions bled into larger conflicts. His whispers about Harry's parents, his digs about his fame, his constant needling created a tension that carried into Quidditch matches, corridor encounters, and even the infamous duels. The seeds were sown in the dungeon, where Malfoy, backed by Snape, could attack without fear. Rowling ensured that Harry's dislike of Draco was never just about a single insult, but about years of cumulative poison. What makes these moments so memorable in the books is their realism. Anyone who has faced a school bully knows that the cruelty is rarely just in big confrontations. It is in the small, daily remarks, the teacher's favoritism, the sideways smirks that make every lesson unbearable. Rowling captured that truth in Harry's potions classes, giving the rivalry an authenticity that resonated with readers. The films focused on spectacle overlooked this, losing the subtle but essential layer of Harry's school life. By leaving this dimension unexplored, the films inadvertently softened Draco's role. Viewers saw him as an arrogant antagonist, but readers knew him as a constant thorn, relentless in his need to belittle Harry in front of peers and professors alike. The dungeons of Hogwarts were not just rooms of bubbling cauldrons, they were battlegrounds of pride, prejudice, and survival. And it was there, more than anywhere else, that Harry and Draco's enmity was forged in the slow, merciless fire of everyday humiliation. Number 19, insults against the Weasley family. Draco Malfoy's sneer was not just a matter of rivalry between two Hogwarts students. It was a weapon sharpened by centuries of pure-blood pride and aimed with precision at Harry's chosen family. The films captured his arrogance, but they stripped away the cruelest edge of his words, the venom directed not only at Harry, but also at Ron and Ginny Weasley. In J.K. Rowling's novels, Draco's insults toward the Weasley family cut deeper than a casual schoolyard taunt. They exposed the class divisions of the wizarding world, highlighting how poverty and lineage could be used as a means of humiliation. These taunts were a recurring thread, shaping the tension between the boys far more than what the cinematic adaptations ever dared to explore. The insult that stands out most vividly comes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. After the Gryffindor Quidditch team acquires new broomsticks through Hermione's quick deduction about Harry's Nimbus 2000 being the team's only decent broom, Malfoy launches his sneer not at Harry directly, but at the loyalty that binds him to the Weasleys. Draco mocks Ron for his family's financial struggles, scoffing, "Weasley would like a signed photo, Potter. It'd be worth more than his house." This moment is far more than a passing jibe. It ignites Ron's fury, embarrasses him in front of his peers, and forces Harry to witness how his best friend is demeaned for something beyond his control. The movies soften this exchange, focusing instead on Harry and Draco's personal rivalry, but the novel makes clear that the cruelty towards the Weasleys was a defining aspect of Malfoy's antagonism. For Harry, these insults carried a weight that the films never fully acknowledged. The Weasleys had offered him not just friendship, but sanctuary. From Mrs. Weasley's first warm hug at King's Cross to the comfort of the Burrow's mismatched furniture and hand-knitted jumpers, they represented the family he never had. Every time Malfoy sneered at Ron's second-hand robes or laughed at Ginny's shyness, Harry felt the sting as if it were directed at himself. When Draco spat out the word weasel, twisting Ron's name into something contemptuous, it wasn't just Ron who burned with humiliation. It was Harry, too, who clenched his fists because the insult struck at his chosen home. The repeated theme of poverty as a weapon reveals a darker side of the wizarding world, one where class divides are as sharp as any magical duel. In the Chamber of Secrets, Malfoy goes even further, pointing to the Weasley family's hand-me-down possessions and crowded household. He derides Ginny, the youngest of 7, with a biting remark that goes unfilmed. "Got a new girlfriend, Potter? Is she the one with the second-hand books?" The line drips with derision, mocking both Ginny's modest background and Harry's association with her. This insult was not just cruel, but prophetic, since Ginny would one day become Harry's wife. The irony of this remark is striking when re-examined, but the film adaptation ignored it, stripping the narrative of a layer that emphasized how Draco's disdain foreshadowed deeper themes of love and loyalty, triumphing over privilege. The frequency of Malfoy's attacks builds a pattern that shapes Ron's character across the series. Ron's insecurities, his envy of Harry's fame, and his occasional sulking were not baseless emotions but responses to constant reminders that he came from less. Malfoy was the personification of those reminders, embodying the sneering superiority of wealth. When Malfoy declared, "Red hair and a hand-me-down robe, you must be a Weasley," the insult defined how Ron was perceived by those who judged him on appearances alone. The repetition of these words chipped away at Ron's confidence, and although the movies show him as hot-tempered, they never fully explain the wounds left by years of such mockery. Harry's anger in these moments was rarely verbal. He often bristled silently, clenching his wand, while Ron erupted in outrage. But what made these insults so pivotal was that they pushed Harry to act. In Chamber of Secrets, Malfoy's remark about Ron's family sparks the physical fight during their first flying lesson, an altercation that leads to Harry's skill on the broom being discovered. Without that chain of events, McGonagall might never have seen Harry's talent, and his place on the Gryffindor team could have been delayed. Thus, Malfoy's insults towards the Weasleys not only wounded but also catalyzed critical plot developments. It was this unspoken role of cruelty as catalyst that the films neglected, reducing Draco to a petty bully rather than a sharp instrument of narrative momentum. The Weasleys' poverty also intersected with their values, and Malfoy knew exactly how to attack both. Arthur Weasley's fascination with Muggles, his government position in a department dismissed as trivial, and the family's refusal to embrace pure-blood elitism made them an easy target. Draco exploited this. He sneered at their home, the Burrow, dismissing it as a pigsty. For Harry, who had lived in the cupboard under the stairs, the burrow was paradise. That contrast made Malfoy's insult sting all the more. When Harry heard the disdain in Draco's voice, he did not just hear Ron being mocked, he heard his own gratitude being twisted into shame. This is why, time and again, Harry defended the Weasleys with more passion than he defended himself. Ginny, too, bore the brunt of Draco's sharp tongue, especially in her first year at Hogwarts. She was young, shy, and vulnerable, carrying the weight of being the only girl among 6 brothers. Malfoy's taunts about her second-hand books and her crush on Harry cut into her fragile confidence. In Chamber of Secrets, when Ginny is revealed to be the one taken into the chamber, Malfoy's earlier sneers about her seem cruelly foreshadowing. He had mocked her place in the world without knowing the immense danger she was facing. The film adaptation underplays this, showing Ginny only as a background character, but the novel makes clear how the bullying she endured from Draco framed her early years at Hogwarts. One must remember that Harry had known cruelty all his life, but it was different with Malfoy. The Dursleys' mistreatment was brutal but private. Draco's insults were public spectacles meant to humiliate. Harry could endure being the target himself, but when Malfoy dragged the Weasleys into his web of sneers, Harry's anger turned white-hot. In those moments, he wasn't just a boy defending his friend, he was a child protecting his newfound family. That instinct, to defend those who offered him love without conditions, is a thread running throughout the series, from his protection of Ron and Hermione to his ultimate sacrifice in the Battle of Hogwarts. The novels also reveal how these insults deepened the enmity between Gryffindor and Slytherin. Malfoy's cruelty wasn't isolated to Harry and Ron, it echoed through the house rivalries. Every time he sneered about weasels, he reinforced the Gryffindor identity as one forged in loyalty and resilience against arrogance. This division set the stage for countless confrontations, from Quidditch matches to the duels that punctuated their school years. The omission of these class-based taunts from the films simplified the rivalry into one of personality clashes rather than exposing the underlying cultural war that Rowling wrote into the fabric of the wizarding world. It is also worth noting how Malfoy's words about the Weasleys became a mirror for Harry's own desires. By mocking Ron's family, Malfoy inadvertently highlighted what Harry longed for: a warm kitchen, a crowded table, parents who cared. Harry could not hate the Weasleys' hand-me-downs because to him they symbolized abundance compared to his own cupboard. Thus, every insult was double-edged, a reminder to Harry of what he missed and what he now had. This duality gave the rivalry with Draco a psychological depth that the films never fully mined. The cruelty of Draco's words also illuminated the resilience of the Weasleys themselves. Molly's fierce protection, Arthur's gentle curiosity, Fred and George's humour, and Ginny's growing strength all showed that despite the mockery, the family thrived on love. The books make it clear that wealth was not the true measure of worth. Every insult Malfoy flung only reinforced the idea that the Weasleys' greatest treasure was each other. In defending them, Harry was defending the very principle that love mattered more than money, a theme at the heart of Rowling's story. The absence of this dynamic in the films deprived viewers of one of the saga's most poignant contrasts. The Chamber of Secrets, in particular, stands as a book where these insults had real consequences. It was after a string of cruel remarks that tempers flared, leading to the dueling club confrontation where Draco conjured the snake, a moment pivotal for revealing Harry's ability to speak Parseltongue. Once again, behind the spectacle of magic lay a foundation of provocation built on derision toward the Weasleys. Without Draco's targeted cruelty, these plot points would lack their spark. The films show the events, but not the deep emotional fuel that ignited them. In the end, Malfoy's obsession with belittling the Weasleys reveals more about him than about them. His taunts about second-hand robes, crowded homes, and hand-me-down books were born of insecurity masked as superiority, yet for Harry they served as moments of clarity. Each insult reminded him that wealth could not buy loyalty and lineage could not guarantee love. The Weasleys proved this truth daily, and Harry clung to them fiercely because of it. The novels give us these raw, painful, and sometimes humiliating moments that made Harry's bond with Ron and Ginny so unbreakable. The films, in omitting them, dimmed one of the sharpest lights in the rivalry between Harry and Draco, the battle not just of wands, but of values. Number 20, the Quidditch Song Taunts. The rivalry between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy reached one of its most venomous points during the events of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Their antagonism had never been a simple schoolyard feud. It was fueled by clashing values, old family legacies, and the pressure of the looming war in the wizarding world. In the films, we see flashes of this enmity, barbed words in corridors, confrontations on the Quidditch pitch. But one of the most significant clashes was deliberately left behind the curtain. This was not a mere exchange of insults. It was an incident that exploded in front of the entire school, leading to Harry's shocking removal from the Gryffindor Quidditch team. What made this moment unforgettable in the books was not just the physical fight, but the bitter way Malfoy chose to humiliate his rivals, dragging their families and reputations into the mud for all of Hogwarts to hear. The Gryffindor team had just endured a humiliating loss to Slytherin, Harry, still reeling from weeks of stress caused by Umbridge's interference at Hogwarts and his painful connection to Voldemort, had put everything into this match. Yet even his determination could not overcome the brutal tactics of the Slytherins or the sheer weight of pressure hanging over him. When the match ended, Malfoy saw his opportunity. Unlike in the films, where the aftermath of the game is brushed aside, the book reveals a cruel moment carefully orchestrated by Draco. He did not simply taunt Harry about losing. He had prepared verses, mocking rhymes twisted into cutting songs that he belted out for the crowd. It was a calculated strike designed to pierce Harry where he was most vulnerable. Malfoy's so-called victory song was not confined to Quidditch itself. His lyrics turned viciously personal, targeting Harry's relationship with Cho Chang and mocking Ron Weasley's family status. The words dripped with malice, written to make Harry and Ron look like fools in the eyes of their peers. One particularly cruel line included in the book reads, "Weasley cannot save a thing, he cannot block a single ring." The sneer went deeper than mocking athletic ability. It was a reminder that the Weasleys, poor and ridiculed for generations, were constantly under scrutiny by wealthier, pure-blood families like the Malfoys. To Draco, the Quidditch pitch was not just a field, it was a stage to rehearse his family's contempt for everything the Weasleys and Harry represented. The atmosphere in the stands grew charged as Malfoy's voice rang out. For a moment, even the Slytherins seemed taken aback at the boldness of his jeers, but laughter quickly spread through their green and silver crowd. For the Gryffindors, however, it was humiliation piled on top of disappointment. Harry's heart pounded with rage. The grief of losing Sirius in the near future was not yet upon him, but even now his emotional state was fragile. He could barely tolerate the sneers of the Slytherins on a normal day, but Malfoy had crossed a line that was impossible to ignore. Fred and George Weasley, known for their fiery tempers and loyalty to their younger brother, heard the mocking of Ron and snapped. Together with Harry, they launched themselves at Malfoy in full view of the pitch. The moment was chaotic, charged with an energy rarely seen at Hogwarts outside of real battles. Brooms and players scattered as the three Gryffindors hurled themselves into the fray. There was no careful calculation now, no witty retort, only fists and fury. The book describes it plainly. Harry had never wanted to hit anyone as badly as he wanted to hit Malfoy at that moment. This was not a magical duel, but something more primal, more human. The years of rivalry, the sneers about parents, and the cruel songs all came boiling over. Draco, of course, was quick to strike back, and the scuffle turned into a spectacle that shocked the onlookers. It was not just Harry's rage at play. Fred and George were particularly protective of Ron, who had already been battling insecurities about his worth to the team and to his friends. Malfoy's chant did not simply bruise Ron's pride, it carved into the very doubts that haunted him. To see their younger brother mocked so publicly after he had trained and fought so hard was unbearable for the twins. Their loyalty to family outweighed every rule, every fear of punishment. They fought with the ferocity of brothers who had seen enough of their siblings' suffering. This fierce sense of justice made the incident far more powerful than a petty schoolyard quarrel. What the films erased was the scandal that erupted after this outburst. The fight did not end quietly. Teachers rushed in, wands drawn to break apart the brawl. Malfoy nursed his bruises, but he also wore a smirk of satisfaction. He had achieved what he wanted. Harry's temper had once again betrayed him. Umbridge, already seeking opportunities to crush Gryffindor's spirit, pounced. She banned Harry, Fred, and George from ever playing Quidditch again. For Harry, who described Quidditch as the only thing worth living for at school, this punishment was devastating. In one stroke, Umbridge had stolen not only his role as Seeker, but also his greatest outlet for joy and relief from the weight of destiny pressing on him. The injustice of this ban was palpable. Everyone at Hogwarts knew that Malfoy had deliberately provoked the fight. His cruel songs were not just playful teasing, they were designed to wound. Yet the ministry-backed authority of Dolores Umbridge allowed no appeals. The scene captured Rowling's theme of corrupt power, silencing fair judgment. It was not enough that Harry and his friends had been mocked. Now they were also stripped of the one passion that gave them escape from their burdens. For Fred and George, Quidditch had been one of the few unifying joys before they eventually left Hogwarts in rebellion. Losing it felt like a foreshadowing of their inevitable break with the school system. The detail matters because it highlights Malfoy's true strength, not in magic, not in physical fights, but in manipulation and provocation. He could read weaknesses and twist them into weapons sharper than any hex. The films often reduce him to a sneering school bully, but the book reveals a calculating side, a young man trained in cruelty by a father who understood that words could destroy reputations as effectively as spells could destroy bodies. This incident on the Quidditch pitch was one of Malfoy's most effective psychological victories. By forcing Harry to lose control, he showed just how vulnerable the boy who lived could be to emotional sabotage. For readers, the scene also underscored Harry's humanity. Heroes are often imagined as calm, collected, and morally untouchable, but Harry was none of these things. He was angry, grieving, and at times reckless. His attack on Malfoy was not a heroic act, but a lapse of judgment born of pain. Rowling's decision to include this made Harry more real, more relatable. His flaws were on display, and so was the high cost of giving in to anger. The punishment of being banned from Quidditch seemed harsh, but it was also a narrative reminder that choices have consequences, even for those destined to be saviors. Ron's humiliation added another layer to the episode. For him, being keeper was more than just a position. It was proof that he could stand shoulder to shoulder with Harry and Hermione, that he was not doomed to live in their shadows. Malfoy's chant was not just a joke, it was an attack on Ron's deepest insecurity. Readers could feel the sting of those words. The Weasleys' poverty had always been an open wound, one that made Ron defensive and bitter. Malfoy's taunt ripped it open in front of the whole school, leaving scars that even a brotherly brawl could not erase. This moment deepened the sympathy readers felt for Ron, whose struggles were often overshadowed by Harry's more dramatic fate. Fred and George's role in the incident also foreshadowed their eventual departure from Hogwarts in spectacular rebellion. Their willingness to risk everything for the sake of loyalty and principle was already visible in this fight. They were not afraid to challenge authority or to throw punches when words were not enough. In many ways, this was an early glimpse of their later courage in abandoning school to forge their own path. Their ban from Quidditch felt unjust. but it was also consistent with their story. Two young men who could not and would not be restrained by oppressive rules. For Malfoy, the incident was a triumph wrapped in bruises. He had drawn out Harry's worst impulses and triggered Umbridge's wrath. In the eyes of the Slytherins, he had proven his superiority. He could boast that he had driven the famous Seeker off the pitch for good. Yet beneath the smirk lay a different truth. Malfoy needed such provocations to feel powerful. Without his father's wealth, without the shadow of his family name, his strength rested only in his ability to manipulate. The incident revealed both his cruelty and his fragility. He could not win a fair duel with Harry, so he fought with songs and sneers. The absence of this moment in the films left a noticeable gap in the portrayal of both Harry and Draco. Without it, audiences missed the depth of Malfoy's malice and Harry's vulnerability. They missed the injustice of Umbridge's punishments and the heartbreak of losing Quidditch. They missed the fire of Fred and George's loyalty, which makes their eventual exit from Hogwarts even more powerful. It is a reminder that adaptations often smooth over the raw edges of a story, but in doing so they risk losing the heartbeat of conflict that made the books resonate so deeply. This clash was not simply about Quidditch, nor was it only about schoolyard rivalries. It was a microcosm of the larger battle brewing in the wizarding world. On one side were those who fought for loyalty, love, and fairness, willing to risk themselves for each other. On the other were those who thrived on cruelty, division, and manipulation, eager to use power to humiliate and control. The Gryffindor brawl after the match may have looked like a teenage squabble, but it was also a symbol of the war to come. Every insult, every punch, and every unjust punishment foreshadowed the larger struggles that would define Harry's journey. Number 21, the carriage scene with Thestrals. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, one of the most haunting moments comes when Harry realizes he can see the Thestrals. These skeletal, bat-winged creatures, invisible to anyone who has not witnessed death, stand silently before the castle carriages. For Harry, the sight of them after Cedric Diggory's murder is unsettling, a stark reminder that he has crossed a threshold his classmates have not. In the book, Rowling uses this to emphasize Harry's isolation. He notices that even Neville and Luna share his strange ability, while Ron and Hermione see nothing. This detail reinforces the theme of growing apart from friends, but also opens a window into Harry's vulnerability at the very start of his 5th year. The films, however, chose a simpler path, focusing only on Harry's confusion and his discovery of Luna's shared vision, leaving out smaller but meaningful interactions that would have deepened the tension, especially his ongoing battles with Draco Malfoy. Draco had always been quick to spot Harry's moments of weakness and exploit them. In the book, Rowling makes clear that Malfoy thrived on small humiliations more than grand gestures. It is not simply the duels or large confrontations that gave fuel to their rivalry. It was the steady drip of taunts and whispers that wore Harry down. The scene with the Thestrals provided such an opportunity. While Ron, Hermione, and Ginny could not see the creatures, Malfoy, sitting comfortably in the carriage with his usual entourage of Crabbe and Goyle, seized the chance to laugh at Harry's apparent eccentricity. From Malfoy's perspective, Harry was talking nonsense about invisible monsters pulling the carriages. The films erased this jab, smoothing over an important beat in the relationship between the two boys. The line between bravery and madness was thin in the eyes of the Hogwarts crowd. Harry had returned from the Triwizard Tournament claiming that Voldemort was back. The Ministry denied it, and the Daily Prophet painted him as unstable. Malfoy was all too eager to echo those rumors, so when Harry mentioned creatures that others could not see, Malfoy had the perfect weapon. It is easy to imagine the sneer on his face as he mocked Harry's visions. His followers would have laughed, and for Harry, the sting of being laughed at for telling the truth would have cut deeply. Rowling even underscores Harry's sense of alienation with the quote, "You can't see them? You can't see what's pulling the carriages?" His disbelief only heightened Malfoy's amusement. It was not about creatures anymore. It was about undermining Harry's sanity in front of his peers. The omission of this detail in the film adaptation might appear small, but it alters the emotional arc of the story. By softening Malfoy's role, the movie shifts focus away from how relentless he could be. Draco was not simply a rival on the Quidditch pitch or a sneering Slytherin in the corridor. He was a constant thorn, searching for every opportunity to remind Harry of his supposed instability. The Thestral moment would have captured that perfectly. It would not have been a dramatic showdown, but a quiet, insidious humiliation, exactly the kind of cruelty that feels most real to a teenager. Without it, audiences lost a glimpse into why Harry often felt cornered, why the Whisper campaign against him succeeded so easily, and why he lashed out so much during that 5th year. It is also telling that Neville Longbottom could see the Thestrals too, having witnessed his parents' fate at the hands of Bellatrix Lestrange. Yet Malfoy never targeted Neville with the same venom he reserved for Harry. Draco's fixation on Harry went beyond simple house rivalries. The carriages gave him a perfect stage, Harry, already self-conscious, appearing to talk to thin air, while Malfoy smirked in front of a crowd. For readers, the moment was an extension of the campaign of disbelief that had already begun in the wider wizarding world. Harry's truth about Voldemort was twisted into delusion. Malfoy, parroting his father's beliefs, added fuel to the fire with childish cruelty. It was one of those quiet but powerful links between schoolyard bullying and the larger political manipulation at play. When Rowling wrote that Harry had the distinct feeling that the train had just carried him a long way from his friends, it was not only because of Ron and Hermione's inability to see the Thestrals. It was also because of the laughter behind him, the kind of laughter that isolates. Malfoy's mockery would have turned that moment from confusion into public humiliation. Harry's vulnerability became visible to the entire carriage, and Malfoy relished. The film, eager to streamline the story, chose instead to portray Harry's vision as a mysterious secret shared only with Luna. While touching, it misses the broader point. Harry's struggle was not just with the mystery of death, but with the cruelty of those who refused to understand. Draco's character, too, loses texture when such moments are removed. In the books, he is not a misunderstood anti-hero, but a boy shaped by arrogance, privilege, and fear. His cruelty is petty, not grand. He does not need a duel to prove superiority. He only needs a whispered insult. The carriage scene shows him not as a schemer in the shadows, but as an ordinary bully mocking what he does not understand. That pettiness made him believable because readers recognize that kind of cruelty from their own school years. The loss of that scene in the films makes him appear less persistent, less real. His rivalry with Harry becomes more theatrical than personal. Consider how different the carriage ride might have felt if filmed as written. The camera could have lingered on Harry's wide eyes as he watched the skeletal creatures stir, on Neville's anxious glance, on Luna's dreamy calm, then the sneer of Draco in the background, dismissing Harry's words as lunacy. The contrast would have sharpened, Harry and a handful of others touched by death, isolated in truth, while Malfoy laughed with the crowd. That is the heart of Order of the Phoenix, truth against denial, isolation against belonging. The absence of this detail weakens that theme on screen. Rowling gives us enough to imagine Malfoy's words. He had already spent much of the summer through his father's connections, hearing that Harry Potter was unstable. For Malfoy, repeating that gossip at school was natural. It was easy to picture him saying, "See, even Potter believes in invisible horses now." It is the kind of jab that sticks, not because it is clever, but because it is cruelly timed. That is what made the book's version of Malfoy so effective. He was always watching for cracks, ready to press just enough to cause pain. Harry's anger in that year often seemed disproportionate to his friends. He snapped, he shouted, he brooded. But moments like the thestral carriage explain why. Each humiliation layered upon another. He had no adult allies, the prophet painted him as a liar, and at school his rival turned his trauma into a joke. In such a climate, his outbursts become understandable. They are not simply teenage mood swings, but reactions to constant invalidation. Malfoy's laughter in the carriage was one more thread in that web of isolation, pulling Harry deeper into the despair that defined his 5th year. The story of thestrals themselves is laced with symbolism. They represent acceptance of death, an unwelcome but necessary clarity. For Harry, seeing them was a sign of growing up too soon. Malfoy's mockery in the carriage becomes even more cruel in that context. He was laughing not at a quirk, but at a sign of Harry's grief. What Harry saw was Cedric's death embodied. What Malfoy saw was an opportunity for ridicule. Rowling's choice to put this mockery into the narrative was deliberate. It reminded readers that grief is often invisible, and when it surfaces, it is vulnerable to attack. In leaving out this moment, the film adaptation turned thestrals into a curiosity rather than a wound. The creatures became simply another magical discovery, with Luna serving as an eccentric guide. But in the book, their first appearance is a scene heavy with tension, ridicule, and misunderstanding. It shows that grief isolates, that friends cannot always see what you see, and that enemies may seize the chance to deepen your loneliness. Malfoy's carriage sneer may be a footnote, but it captures the cruel reality of being a teenager coping with loss in an environment where cruelty thrives. The artistry of Rowling's writing lies in these details. The way Malfoy undermines Harry with small cuts, the way Luna validates his sight, the way Neville shares it quietly, all weave into a picture of what it means to carry grief. Readers feel Harry's shame, his defiance, and his anger. Watching the film, one only feels curiosity. Without Malfoy's taunt, there is no sting. Without the sting, there is no reason for Harry's simmering rage to feel so justified. This is why the omitted scene continues to draw attention from readers who notice its absence. It is a single thread whose removal makes the tapestry weaker. When fans debate the choices of the films, they often think of the grand omissions, Peeves, the Marauder's backstory, the full prophecy. Yet it is moments like the thestral carriage that show how even small erasures change the tone. Draco mocking Harry for seeing creatures that embody grief would have added depth to both characters. It would have reminded audiences that villains are not always cloaked in grandeur. Sometimes they wear school robes and smirk in a carriage. It would have reminded them, too, that heroes are not simply brave, but also vulnerable to laughter. The book gave us that. The film, in its silence, left it behind. Number 22, Aftermath of the Battle of Hogwarts. The final duel between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy never happened in the way some expected. In the films, their rivalry seemed to close almost abruptly after the Battle of Hogwarts, as if the war had washed away years of hostility in a single moment. Yet the books present a far more layered and human portrait of what came after. Draco was no longer the arrogant boy who strutted across the corridors with Crabbe and Goyle at his heels, but neither was he a transformed friend suddenly reconciled with Harry. Instead, the novels gave space to silence, distance, and the uncomfortable grey zone that follows when former enemies survive the same war, but cannot forget its scars. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, one of the most telling moments arrives not during the chaos of battle, but in the quiet after. Harry sees Draco with his parents, reunited in the Great Hall. They are not triumphant victors, but a fragile family clinging to survival. J.K. Rowling describes how Narcissa Malfoy's desperate act of lying to Voldemort to protect her son altered everything. It saved Harry's life, and indirectly it gave the Malfoys a place among the survivors. Harry does not approach Draco in this moment, but he notices them, and that glance is essential. It is the recognition that their story has shifted. Harry has been spared by Draco's mother, and Draco himself has been humbled by the collapse of everything he once relied upon. Later, in the epilogue, set 19 years after the war, Rowling gives a brief but poignant scene that the films echo only faintly. Harry, standing at platform 9 3/4 with his own children, meets Draco's eyes across the station. The text reads, "He caught sight of Draco Malfoy, who was also watching his son. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was the kind of acknowledgement that two men might make if they had once been enemies but no longer were." This is not reconciliation in the sense of friendship, but it is closure. The recognition is subtle, wordless, and exactly what one might expect from two men who share memories too heavy to retell, but no reason to fight anymore. What makes this important is how Rowling chose restraint instead of dramatics. A film often longs for finality, for a clear resolution that leaves no ambiguity. In the cinematic version, Draco is almost erased after his dramatic hesitation in the Room of Requirement. We see him saved by Harry's hand, and later, a brief shot of him leaving with his parents. The camera does not linger on what this means for him, nor does it invite the audience to wonder about his path into adulthood. The films, in their need to conclude, flatten the tension into a neat bow. The books, however, keep that tension alive, reminding us that true reconciliation is rarely cinematic. One must remember that Draco's journey was never simple. He was not a murderer, though Voldemort tried to make him one. He was a coward at times, yet that cowardice was also survival. Harry's saving of Draco's life in the Room of Requirement is an act that forever binds them in silence. When Goyle's fiend fire almost kills Draco, it is Harry who pulls him to safety, echoing an earlier moment in Half-Blood Prince when Harry spares Draco in the bathroom duel, refusing to let Sectum Sempra's wounds become fatal. These instances of mercy accumulate, and they shape Draco's perception. Though he cannot easily speak gratitude, the burden of having been saved by Harry leaves him without the arrogance that once fueled their rivalry. It is also striking that Rowling shows Harry observing Draco with something close to empathy. During the Malfoys' desperate search for their son in the Great Hall, Harry does not mock him or think of revenge. He sees only a family torn apart by choices that nearly destroyed them. In that moment, the enmity shrinks beneath the enormity of war. Harry has fought Voldemort, he has buried friends, and Draco is simply another survivor. The narrative thus moves their relationship from personal rivalry into the broader category of shared trauma. In the years that follow, Rowling lets the silence do the work. The epilogue scene is brief, but it implies years of non-encounters, of distant recognition without open hostility. This is the quiet truth of adulthood. Enemies from childhood rarely transform into close companions. More often, they dissolve into strangers who share a peculiar understanding. The films, by skipping this nuance, rob the audience of a crucial truth about Harry's world, that healing is uneven and that not all wounds become friendships. The presence of Astoria Greengrass, Draco's eventual wife, adds another dimension that the films omit entirely. Rowling explained outside the novels that Astoria softened Draco, encouraging him to raise Scorpius free from the prejudices of blood purity that once defined the Malfoy legacy. By the time Harry sees him at King's Cross, Draco is not the boy who sneered, "My father will hear about this." He is a father himself, subdued and far more interested in his son's safety than in any old rivalry. That transformation is subtle but profound. It shows that Draco, though not redeemed in dramatic gestures, reshaped his life away from hatred. What makes this omission in the films so notable is that Draco and Harry's story is one of parallels. Both were boys shaped by the choices of their parents, both thrust into roles they did not entirely want. The books reveal that after the war these parallels remain, but they no longer intersect in conflict. Instead, they become parallel lines running side by side, occasionally crossing in a nod or glance. That is the essence of their relationship's ending, not explosive reconciliation, not eternal enmity but quiet endurance. Rowling herself once noted that she could not see Harry and Draco as friends because their values were too different. Yet she insisted that the rivalry lost its teeth after the war. This middle ground is realistic. Readers who have grown up understand how people change with age, how rivalries fade not through dramatic apologies, but through the passage of time and the reshaping of priorities. Seeing Draco as a man responsible for a family allows readers to recognize that even the most antagonistic characters are not frozen in childhood. In one of the most quoted passages from the epilogue, Rowling writes of Harry's feelings toward Draco. There was no longer malice in the look they exchanged. There was instead a kind of weary recognition. That word, weariness, is important. It is not warmth, but it is honest. It conveys the exhaustion of men who fought on opposite sides, who saw the same castle burn, who lost people they cared about, and who now stand among the living trying to build something new. This weary recognition is more powerful than a cinematic handshake or a dramatic truce could ever be. The absence of this nuance in the films leaves viewers with a simplified impression of Draco. He becomes a shadow of what he was, a boy who exits the story without resolution. For readers, however, he becomes an emblem of quiet change. He does not stand beside Harry as an ally, but he no longer stands against him. He is not forgiven in a speech, but he is absolved in silence. That silence tells us everything. Draco has stepped away from the world of enmity into a more private struggle of rebuilding. When considering the consequences of the Battle of Hogwarts, it is vital to see Draco not just as a former rival, but as a casualty of a different sort. His arrogance was shattered, his loyalties tested, his safety bought not by his own power, but by the mercy of others. The films skipped this reckoning, but the books preserved it. They show us that the end of war is not clean. For Draco and Harry, it meant an uneasy peace defined not by friendship, but by mutual acknowledgement of survival. This, ultimately, is why the literary version resonates more deeply. It captures the truth that enemies do not always reconcile, but they can stop fighting. It shows that the weight of shared history sometimes results in a glance, a nod, and nothing more. That glance at King's Cross, wordless yet heavy with memory, is the true end of their story. And it is precisely this ending, subtle, weary, unresolved, that the films decided to leave behind, though it may be the most human moment of all. Number 23, The First Flying Lesson Rivalry. Harry Potter's first flying lesson is one of those moments that the films reduced to a quick spectacle, but in the book it carries the weight of destiny. When Harry mounted a broomstick for the very first time in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it was not just a scene about discovering a hidden talent. It was the moment when his rivalry with Draco Malfoy ignited into something sharp, personal, and irreconcilable. The movie chose to simplify this scene, showing Harry soaring upward and immediately impressing Madame Hooch with his natural skill. Yet in the book, the story is richer, full of tension and provocation, with Draco deliberately baiting Harry until a chase across the skies sealed the enmity between them. This confrontation became the true beginning of their feud, and leaving it behind in the adaptation stripped the story of one of its most formative clashes. The book describes the lesson vividly. Madame Hooch instructs the students to place their right hands over their brooms and call, "Up!" It is a moment of awkward comedy, as only a few succeed. Hermione Granger's broom stubbornly refuses to budge, while Neville Longbottom's leaps eagerly into his hand. Harry, however, is the one whose broom rises instantly, as if it were already attuned to him. This detail, seemingly small, foreshadows how naturally flying would come to him, and how important the broomstick would be in his destiny. But the true drama of that day begins when Neville's broom disobeys and carries him up before he is ready. In panic, Neville loses control, crashes and falls, injuring his wrist. Madame Hooch hurries him to the hospital wing, sternly warning the others not to move from the ground until she returns. It is this absence of authority that opens the stage for Malfoy's cruelty. Draco Malfoy seizes the moment like a performer on cue. Spotting the small remembrall, a glass ball that glows when the owner has forgotten something, that Neville had dropped, Draco picks it up with mocking amusement. "Look," he sneers, "Longbottom's forgotten his toy." The book captures the malice in his tone, for it is not just teasing, but the delight of humiliating someone weaker. The remembrall, given to Neville by his grandmother, symbolizes comfort, and Draco's willingness to throw it away is not about the object itself, but about establishing dominance. For Harry, who had grown up watching bullies torment Dudley's victims, the scene strikes a familiar nerve. This is no longer just a classmate showing off. It is the cruelty Harry had always despised, directed at one of the few friends he is beginning to care about. Draco mounts his broom with a smirk and takes to the air, clutching the remembrall. He taunts Harry from above, daring him to fetch it. The moment is cinematic in its own way, yet the film discards it entirely. Harry, filled with indignation, breaks Madame Hooch's rule without hesitation. His feet leave the ground, and the broom rises as though answering an instinct older than himself. The narration in the book describes the rush of freedom, the wind in his hair, and the startling realization that this feels right, that he belongs in the sky. His anger drives him forward, his broom responding to his will like an extension of his body. What could have been just a childish quarrel becomes a revelation of Harry's identity. Malfoy, noticing Harry's pursuit, sneers again and hurls the remembrall high into the air. In that split second, Harry's reflexes reveal themselves. He leans forward, dives, and snatches the glass ball just before it hits the ground. A foot from the ground, he caught it, spectacularly. These are the words Rowling uses, cementing Harry's arrival as a seeker in more ways than one. The act is not about a game, not yet. It is about protecting a friend's dignity, proving that Malfoy's cruelty will not go unchallenged. It is the sort of instinctive bravery that defines Harry throughout his life, the refusal to let injustice stand even when the rules say otherwise. The significance of this moment is doubled when Professor McGonagall happens to witness Harry's flight. Instead of scolding him for breaking the rules, she recognizes the rare gift he has displayed. Within hours, Harry is being introduced to Oliver Wood as the new seeker for Gryffindor's Quidditch team. This is not just luck. It is the narrative consequence of his defiance against Draco. Without Malfoy's cruelty, without Harry's anger, the talent might have gone unnoticed for months. The book shows clearly that Malfoy, without intending it, launched Harry toward greatness. In the movie, by removing this clash, the story flattens into a simple discovery of skill, lacking the sting of rivalry that sharpened the original. What makes this scene unforgettable in the book is not just Harry's flying, but the way it establishes the psychology of his relationship with Draco. Malfoy is not just a spoiled boy, he is the mirror of everything Harry despises about privilege misused. Harry is not simply a talented child, he is the one who will always leap to defend someone being trampled. The broomstick chase is their first real duel, fought not with wands but with daring and instinct. To erase this is to erase the foundation of their antagonism. Later confrontations, whether in Quidditch matches or in darker conflicts, all echo this first chase where pride, cruelty, and courage collided. The dialogue in the book underscores this dynamic. Harry's own thoughts reveal the indignation burning in him. Harry couldn't stand it. He had never believed he would fly, but he had to get that remembrall back. These lines demonstrate that Harry's disobedience is not reckless thrill-seeking, but moral compulsion. By contrast, Draco's taunts drip with condescension. "Come and get it, Potter," he calls, making the challenge personal. In those words, the rivalry crystallizes. Draco is not merely mocking Neville, he is drawing a line with Harry, daring him to cross it. And Harry does, without hesitation. The adaptation, by skipping this, loses the emotional logic of Harry's recruitment into Quidditch. In the movie, McGonagall notices his flying when he retrieves Neville's dropped Remembrall, but the absence of Malfoy's provocation reduces the stakes. There is no battle of wills, no symbol of injustice corrected, only a boy showing natural talent. For readers of the book, the difference is striking. The tension, the anger, the sense of standing up to a bully, all of it vanishes in the film, leaving only spectacle. The omission may seem small, but it alters the emotional landscape of the rivalry. The first broomstick chase is also an early hint of Harry's role as someone who bends the rules for the right reasons. Madam Hooch's command not to move is absolute, yet Harry ignores it because he feels something more important is at stake. This foreshadows his lifelong habit of breaking school rules, ministry edicts, or even magical laws in the pursuit of what is right. In contrast, Draco's obedience is selective. He will obey when it benefits him, but he will also break rules to assert dominance. The symmetry is striking. Both boys disobey, but for opposite motives. The book presents this duality in a way the film bypasses entirely. It is also important to remember that this was the moment Harry experienced the thrill of flying for the very first time. The rush of wind, the control of the broom, the sense that the sky belongs to him, it is a birthright he had never known existed. The fact that this discovery is tied directly to his defiance of Malfoy adds weight. Flying becomes not just a personal joy but an act of resistance, a declaration that he will not be cowed. When he later becomes Gryffindor's Seeker, every match against Slytherin carries the echo of that first chase, the unspoken reminder that Malfoy had challenged him and lost. Another layer of significance lies in the symbolism of the Remembrall. It is not a valuable object in terms of money or power. It is small, fragile, and sentimental. For Harry to risk punishment and danger to retrieve it shows his priorities, the defense of the overlooked and the vulnerable. Malfoy, by contrast, treats it as trash to be discarded for amusement. In this small glass ball lies the essence of their difference. One protects, the other ridicules. The film, by not emphasizing this, diminishes the clarity of their moral opposition. The rivalry that unfolds throughout the series, from insults in the common room to duels in the corridors, can all be traced back to this first airborne conflict. It is here that Malfoy realizes Harry is not someone he can easily intimidate, and Harry realizes Malfoy embodies the arrogance he despises. Their later confrontations in Quidditch, especially when Draco joins the Slytherin team, are built upon this first chase. The book creates a narrative thread linking Harry's flying skill, his moral compass, and his rivalry with Malfoy into one seamless event. Without it, the films reduce their enmity to a handful of insults and sneers rather than a pivotal clash of values. This first flying lesson also reveals something essential about Harry's character arc. He does not plan his heroism. It erupts from instinct. He does not weigh consequences but acts because he cannot do otherwise. This is why Professor McGonagall sees greatness in him, why Oliver Wood sees the makings of a seeker, and why readers see the seeds of the chosen one. Malfoy, in trying to belittle him, accidentally forced Harry to reveal what he truly is. The irony is perfect. The boy who wanted to prove his superiority gave Harry the chance to shine in a way no classroom lesson ever could. When viewed closely, the scene is not about a broomstick or a glass ball at all. It is about two 11-year-olds defining who they will be to each other for the next 7 years. The book presents this with richness, with the clash of pride and principle painted in full color. The film, in its brevity, leaves only the faint outline of this rivalry. For those who know the text, the missing conflict is not just a detail left on the cutting room floor. It is the origin story of enmity, courage, and the bond between Harry and the sky that would follow him to the very end. Number 24, Draco, and the Inquisitorial Squad's power. In the book Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Draco Malfoy's involvement with Dolores Umbridge is far more sinister than the films allow the audience to see. The movie briefly shows him smirking in her office, escorting Harry through the halls, but this is only a shadow of what unfolds in the pages. Rowling crafted a version of Malfoy who is not merely a spoiled rival to Harry, but an active enforcer of tyranny. He becomes part of what Umbridge proudly calls her inquisitorial squad, a group of students with badges and authority, empowered to police their peers. The films erase this deeper corruption, and in doing so remove a crucial layer of Malfoy's cruelty during that dark school year. What the camera shows as a few smirks and insults, the text describes as systemic betrayal and abuse of power. The inquisitorial squad is not just a symbolic group. They have real authority. Unlike prefects who were supposed to maintain order in a balanced way, this squad had the ability to dock house points, something normally reserved for teachers. When Umbridge gives Draco Malfoy this power, it becomes a weapon in his hands. The boy who had spent years ridiculing Harry and Gryffindor suddenly had institutional backing for his cruelty. In Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes, the inquisitorial squad was given free rein to impose order, and they gleefully took points from Gryffindor whenever possible. This meant Harry and his friends were not only fighting Umbridge, but also Draco and his allies, now with permission to torment them in ways they never could before. It is one thing to laugh when someone else is punished. It is another thing entirely to become the punisher. Malfoy crossed that line willingly. He had always mocked Harry, Hermione, and Ron, but with Umbridge behind him, he could now act directly against them. The book describes how he and fellow Slytherins, Pansy Parkinson, Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, and even Theodore Nott roamed the castle with a new arrogance. They reported back to Umbridge, spied on hidden conversations, and set traps for members of Dumbledore's army. When Harry and his friends snuck into corridors to organize their secret defense against the dark arts lessons, it was Malfoy and his squad who hunted them down. The cruelty was no longer childish rivalry, it was persecution dressed in the cloak of authority. One example that highlights this change is the betrayal at the Hog's Head, where Dumbledore's army first gathered. In the book, it is revealed later that one of the students leaked word to Umbridge, and soon the inquisitorial squad knew where to look. Malfoy's excitement over this was unmistakable. Rowling shows him as relishing every moment of catching Gryffindors off guard. Malfoy and the inquisitorial squad had cornered them, the narration explains when Harry's group was finally exposed. The glee was not subtle. Malfoy was not reluctantly obeying an authority figure. He was savouring the chance to humiliate his rivals in a way he could never manage on his own. For Harry, the humiliation cut deep. He was used to Malfoy's insults. He was used to duelling him in classrooms or hearing jeers in the corridors. But watching someone his own age take on the role of a guard, a spy, and an oppressor under Umbridge's blessing was different. Harry recognized that Malfoy had chosen this path, not under coercion, but out of delight. When Malfoy caught members of Dumbledore's army, Rowling notes how his pale, pointed face was alight with triumph. This image is powerful because it strips away any illusion that Malfoy was simply a schoolboy rival. He had become, in a small but very real sense, the mirror of his father, an enforcer for authoritarian control. The inquisitorial squad's authority also carried out in subtle acts of everyday cruelty. House points were not just a matter of school competition, they represented morale, pride, and unity. To Gryffindor students, every point mattered, and Malfoy used his new power to snatch them away with mockery. In one passage, the book notes that Gryffindor lost points every day, often for the smallest infractions. Hermione's books being stacked too high, Ron's tie crooked, Neville dropping a quill, each became excuses for Malfoy to grin as he stripped points away. The sense of injustice grew heavier with each passing week, and Harry understood that his classmates' anger was not directed only at Umbridge but also at Malfoy and his fellow enforcers. The squad's greatest moment of triumph came during the ambush at the Ministry of Magic. Before Harry and his friends reached the Department of Mysteries, they were cornered by the inquisitorial squad at Hogwarts. Malfoy, along with Crabbe, Goyle, and others, managed to trap them in Umbridge's office. It was Malfoy's personal victory. He had finally caught Harry red-handed. The book paints the scene with bitter clarity. Malfoy's pale eyes glittered with satisfaction as he and the other Slytherins forced Harry and his friends back against the wall. In that instant, Draco was not simply following orders. He was the boy who had longed to see Harry Potter brought low, and he was finally tasting that victory. The film reduces this to a passing moment, but in the text, it carries weight. It is the culmination of a year's worth of petty cruelties and targeted schemes. What makes Malfoy's role chilling is that it was voluntary. He was not drafted into the squad, he joined it eagerly. He saw in Umbridge's rise to power a chance to advance his own standing. For Harry, it was a reminder that cruelty often thrives not only because of those in command, but also because of those willing to serve them. Malfoy exemplified this truth at Hogwarts. He was the willing lieutenant, the boy who chose the role of informer rather than the role of resistor. It is telling that other students did not flock to the squad in large numbers. Most resisted Umbridge in quiet ways, but Draco stood front and centre, proud to wear the badge. There is a passage in the book that illustrates how gleeful Malfoy was in this new role. When Harry tries to defend himself, Malfoy mocks him, saying, "You're going to lose, Potter. We've got the power now." These words sting more than his usual insults. They show a boy intoxicated by borrowed authority, reveling in a system that allows him to strike at those he despises. For Harry, it was not just about his personal rivalry anymore. It was about watching injustice spread through the school, enforced by the face he knew so well. Every time Malfoy flashed that badge, it was a reminder that cruelty had been legitimized. The relationship between Harry and Malfoy during this year shifted into new territory. In earlier books, Malfoy was a nuisance, a rival on the Quidditch pitch, a sharp-tongued bully. But during the reign of Umbridge, he became something darker, an enemy within the walls. Rowling carefully builds this tension, showing how Harry's hatred deepened. He did not merely dislike Malfoy, he despised the way Malfoy embraced the role of persecutor. Watching a peer enforce tyranny brought Harry a kind of helpless fury, because it showed how fragile justice could be when authority was placed in the wrong hands. It is important to remember that Malfoy was not acting alone. He represented a larger truth about power structures. Umbridge, of course, was the central villain, but her strength lay in her ability to recruit those who were willing to serve. Draco, Pansy, and the others made her power sustainable. In this way, ruling shows the mechanics of oppression. It is never just one figure at the top, but the many smaller figures who enable her rule. Harry's war at Hogwarts was not only against Umbridge, but also against her student enforcers, with Draco at the forefront. This adds another layer to their rivalry, one that films did not fully capture. The inquisitorial squad also deepened the division between the houses, especially Gryffindor and Slytherin. What had once been a school rivalry became something more poisonous. The Slytherins in the squad enjoyed punishing Gryffindors, and the Gryffindors saw them not as classmates but as collaborators. Malfoy's leadership in this drove a wedge that would not heal easily. When Harry later encountered Malfoy in Half-Blood Prince, the bitterness of the previous year still lingered. It was not just about insults and competitions anymore. It was about betrayal during one of the darkest times at Hogwarts. For readers, the experience of watching Malfoy in the inquisitorial squad is sobering. Rowling pushes the character beyond schoolyard cruelty into the realm of genuine malice. His actions are not life-threatening, but they foreshadow the choices he will face later when Voldemort rises. He demonstrates that he is capable of siding with power, of enjoying authority when it gives him an edge, even at the cost of justice. For Harry, this realization makes their rivalry sharper, more painful. To fight Malfoy now is to fight an institution that has given him permission to act as an oppressor. The absence of this storyline in the films makes Malfoy appear far less dangerous in Order of the Phoenix. On screen, he is still the sneering boy in the background, not the enforcer who drags students by the arm or gleefully strips points from Gryffindor. The book shows the transformation vividly, and in doing so reminds the reader that even among children, the temptation of power can corrupt. Malfoy's pale, triumphant face in those moments is not just a detail, it is the essence of how tyranny works, through the willing participation of those who find joy in it. This was Harry's humiliation, seeing his schoolmate, his rival, turned into the smiling face of injustice. Number 25. Clashes in care of magical creatures. Draco Malfoy's attacks on Harry Potter were never limited to personal jabs about his fame or his family. A deeper, more cutting tactic often emerged during their shared lessons with Rubeus Hagrid, where Draco seized every opportunity to humiliate not only Harry but also the half-giant who had become Harry's trusted friend. In J.K. Rowling's books, these moments reveal how Draco's ridicule of Hagrid stung Harry on two fronts at once. It degraded someone Harry admired and simultaneously highlighted Draco's relentless cruelty. The films glossed over much of this subtle torment, reducing it to passing sneers, but the books preserved the tension of every classroom confrontation. One of the earliest examples lies in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Draco targeted Hagrid's heritage during a heated moment, referring to him as a half-breed oaf. Draco sneered in front of the class, "He's the gamekeeper, isn't he? Some kind of half-breed, I think," before being shushed by his peers. The insult was more than just an attack on Hagrid's size. It was an attempt to undermine Hagrid's authority as a teacher, painting him as incompetent and unworthy of respect. For Harry, who had already found kindness and guidance in Hagrid's mentorship, the insult was intolerable. In the book, Rowling makes it clear that Harry clenched his fists and restrained himself, for nothing infuriated him more than watching someone ridicule Hagrid. The Prisoner of Azkaban intensified this pattern when Hagrid was promoted to Care of Magical Creatures Professor. For Draco it was the perfect storm, a rival he despised supporting a teacher he considered beneath him. His disdain was evident from the first class when Hagrid introduced the students to hippogriffs. Draco's arrogance and cruelty combined disastrously as he approached Buckbeak without the slightest humility. When Buckbeak lashed out and struck him, Draco exaggerated the injury mercilessly, not simply to avoid further classes but to cast Hagrid as reckless and incompetent. Rowling describes how Draco slumped, howling and clutching his arm as though he had been mortally wounded. The malice was not in the wound itself, but in the way he used it afterward. Draco milked the incident for weeks, lounging dramatically in the Slytherin common room and calling Hagrid that oaf whenever he spotted Harry nearby. He complained loudly that Hogwarts allowed a half-giant to endanger students, and he did so with the knowledge that Harry would hear every word. The insult carried a double edge. It dismissed Hagrid's legitimacy and mocked Harry's loyalty to him. Harry's anger grew every time Draco smirked in his direction. In Rowling's words, Harry felt a white-hot surge of fury whenever Hagrid's name was dragged through the mud. The cruelty sharpened further in Goblet of Fire. During one Care of Magical Creatures class, when Hagrid introduced blast-ended Scroots, Draco rolled his eyes and declared loudly that only a moron would think this rubbish worth studying. He ensured his insults were delivered within earshot of Harry, savouring the way Harry's jaw tightened. By scorning Hagrid's lessons, Draco was attacking Harry indirectly. For Harry, who had always seen Hagrid as more than a teacher, a protector, a companion, and the first person to tell him he belonged in the wizarding world, Draco's barbs felt almost personal. Rowling demonstrates Harry's protective instincts clearly during these exchanges. After one particularly loud comment from Draco about Hagrid being unfit to teach anything other than carrying logs, Harry thought bitterly that Draco would never understand loyalty or friendship. The films reduced these lessons to background comedy or skipped them altogether, but in the books they are a battlefield of words where loyalty and cruelty clash. Harry's silence was never indifference. It was the silence of restraint, the suppression of an anger that boiled with each insult. It is important to note that Draco's malice was not merely spontaneous cruelty, it was strategic. By undermining Hagrid in front of the class, he tried to weaken Harry's confidence, to suggest that Harry's closest adult ally was ridiculous. His goal was not just to insult, but to isolate. If Harry's friends were ridiculed, perhaps Harry himself would seem smaller. In Chamber of Secrets, Draco mocked Hagrid's attempt to teach them about gnomes, sneering that Harry must enjoy hanging around with servants. These words, aimed to degrade, revealed Draco's obsession with class, blood, and status. Harry's responses reveal another layer of the rivalry. Though often silent in the face of Malfoy's taunts, Harry's thoughts, as described by Rowling, were laced with rage and loyalty. When Draco sneered about Hagrid's stupidity in Goblet of Fire, Harry immediately snapped, "Shut up, Malfoy!" The retort was sharp, and though it didn't silence Draco, it underscored how Harry could not stand by quietly. Each clash was not about magical skill or Quidditch glory, but about Harry defending the dignity of someone who had defended him. These confrontations also underline a broader theme, the contrast between cruelty and compassion. Hagrid, despite being ridiculed, showed patience. He cared for creatures no one else did, and he opened his classes with enthusiasm even when students mocked him. Draco, by comparison, exemplified arrogance, mocking what he could not understand. Harry found himself caught between them, witnessing the embodiment of two very different worldviews. His anger toward Draco was not simply about insults, it was about the contempt Draco showed for kindness itself. The most striking example of this came after the Buckbeak trial. When the Hippogriff was sentenced to death, Draco gloated. He laughed openly at Harry, Ron, and Hermione's despair, crowing, "I always said Hagrid's teaching was a joke. This proves it." For Harry, the cruelty was unbearable. Rowling writes that Harry longed to hit Malfoy as hard as he could. That moment exposed the depth of Malfoy's cruelty, his delight at another's suffering, his eagerness to exploit it, and his insistence on twisting the knife where Harry's heart was most vulnerable. Though the films touched on Draco's role in Buckbeak's plight, they downplayed the full weight of his jeering afterward. On the page, it is relentless, repeated through multiple chapters, reminding readers of how thoroughly Draco tried to poison Hagrid's standing at Hogwarts. Each insult stoked Harry's fury, not only because of the injustice, but because Hagrid's kindness was something Harry treasured. Draco mocked not just a teacher, but a symbol of Harry's own found family. In these book-only moments, we see Harry's emotional growth. Each time he chose to restrain himself instead of lashing out, Harry displayed maturity beyond Draco's petty cruelty. Though his anger boiled, he understood that giving in to violence would only please Draco further. Rowling presents Harry as someone learning to channel his emotions, turning rage into determination rather than reckless retaliation. His loyalty to Hagrid became not just defensive, but defining, a reflection of the kind of person Harry aspired to be. The absence of these exchanges from the films diminishes a subtle but powerful thread in the rivalry between Harry and Draco. Without them, viewers miss the chance to see how Draco weaponized Hagrid against Harry, how insults about that half-breed or oaf were daggers aimed at Harry's heart. They also missed the way Harry's protective nature deepened with every cruel word. For readers of the books, those lessons were a battlefield where Harry's loyalty and Draco's malice sharpened in stark relief. By erasing these verbal duels, the films lose much of the nuance of Draco's cruelty and Harry's loyalty. On screen, Draco becomes more of a comic nuisance, sneering from the sidelines. In the books, he is a calculated tormentor who presses on Harry's deepest emotional ties. Hagrid is more than a teacher in this struggle. He is the shield Draco tries to shatter, and Harry's defense of him reveals his truest strengths. Loyalty, friendship, and compassion defined Harry, while scorn, arrogance, and cruelty defined Draco. Their clashes in Hagrid's classes remind us that sometimes the sharpest battles are fought not with wands but with words. Number 26. Favours from Snape during lessons. In the pages of J.K. Rowling's books, the enmity between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy did not simply spring to life during Quidditch matches or in the corridors of Hogwarts. One of the most venomous arenas for their conflict was Severus Snape's potions classroom. It was here, surrounded by steaming cauldrons and the heavy scent of burnt ingredients, that the invisible lines of favoritism, bias and manipulation were drawn with cruel precision. The films briefly hinted at this dynamic, showing Snape's open disdain for Harry and his leniency toward Draco, yet they avoided portraying just how deeply and repeatedly this poisoned the daily experience of both boys. In the books, those lessons in the dungeons became battlegrounds where Draco sharpened his weapons of provocation and Harry endured the humiliations of a teacher who should have been an arbiter, but instead was a shield for his rival. Snape's favoritism was not subtle. From the very first potions class, Harry discovered the imbalance of power. When Neville Longbottom's potion went disastrously wrong and melted his cauldron, splashing boils across his skin, Snape turned his fury not on the boy who had bungled the recipe, but on Harry, demanding why he had not warned Neville of his mistake. As the text reads in Philosopher's Stone, "Why didn't you tell him not to add the quills? You, Potter, seem to think this is all a joke. 5 points from Gryffindor." Draco watched these moments with thinly veiled delight, knowing that no matter how innocuous the situation, Snape would find a way to punish Harry. The films condensed this hostility into a few sharp remarks, but the books revealed a pattern, a slow, grinding erosion of fairness that gave Draco the confidence to taunt his rival without fear of consequence. The imbalance was not just in punishments, but also in praise. Draco would offer snide comments across the classroom, muttered insults or mocking observations, knowing full well that Snape would not only ignore them, but sometimes reward him. When Harry struggled with a potion, Snape would ridicule his efforts before the entire class, while Draco's own mediocre attempts were allowed to pass without comment. It is in Chamber of Secrets that this dynamic becomes painfully obvious. Malfoy had managed to produce a weak, greenish solution that bubbled over the rim of his cauldron, but Snape passed his desk with nothing more than a curt nod. When Harry's potion curdled into a solid lump, however, Snape sneered, "Perhaps you'd better try to read the instructions this time, Potter." These small yet relentless moments made the classroom a hostile theatre of war for Harry, one in which Draco was shielded and Harry was exposed. For Draco, Snape's protection was more than favoritism, it was a weapon. He used it to engineer provocations, subtle enough to escape official notice but sharp enough to sting. A jab about Harry's fame here, a sneer about his friends there, and always the certainty that if Harry retaliated, Snape would swoop in. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry's cauldron was sabotaged by a sneaky flick of Draco's wand, sending his potion spilling onto the floor, Snape did not investigate or reprimand the culprit. Instead, he turned to Harry with his usual contempt. 10 points from Gryffindor for carelessness. This was not a singular injustice. It was the rhythm of every lesson repeated until Draco had learned the art of striking without consequence. For readers, these scenes painted a picture of Draco as not merely a schoolyard bully, but a cunning opportunist who thrived under a teacher's corrupt shelter. What makes the absence of these details in the film so striking is how they robbed the rivalry of its slow-burn toxicity. On screen, Harry and Draco appear as occasional enemies. One confronts the other at a Quidditch match or exchanges insults in passing. In the books, however, the claustrophobic setting of the dungeon lessons magnified their tension. Each class was a reminder that Draco did not just rely on his family's wealth or his own arrogance. He had the silent, looming figure of Snape, reinforcing his superiority. For Harry, this was not only infuriating, but also demoralizing. A school subject he could have excelled in became a place of constant defeat, not because of his skill, but because of the blatant bias of the man in charge. The injustice extended beyond personal rivalries. It affected the very balance of house competition. Gryffindor lost points not because of genuine rule-breaking, but because Snape used any excuse to punish Harry, often in the most trivial ways. In Goblet of Fire, Harry was scolded for speaking out of turn, losing 5 points, while Draco muttered a cruel insult about Hermione's teeth moments later, going unpunished. This imbalance was not incidental, it was deliberate. The favoritism infected the House Cup tally, making the rivalry between Slytherin and Gryffindor even sharper. For Draco, it was a license to misbehave, knowing that every jab he threw would cost Gryffindor. Even if it was Harry who bore the brunt of the official reprimand. One of the most stinging examples comes from Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, already weighed down by trauma and suspicion, faced Snape's brutal sarcasm in the dungeons. During one lesson, Snape observed Harry's mistakes and announced loudly to the class, "Famous Harry Potter can't even make a simple, strengthening solution." Draco smirked, his eyes glittering with amusement, as the other Slytherins laughed. It was not just the insult itself, but the theatre of it. Snape made Harry's failure into a spectacle, elevating Draco's role as the ever-watchful rival who fed off these humiliations. The films touch on Snape's cruelty, but rarely linger on how Draco was an active beneficiary, a shadow partner in the campaign against Harry. The books also revealed how Snape's bias shaped Draco's confidence outside the classroom. Knowing that Harry was constantly discredited and shamed in potions gave Draco a foundation from which to launch his taunts in other contexts. He could call Harry a liar, mock his scar, or insult his friends, with the assurance that one of Hogwarts' most feared professors had already framed Harry as incompetent. This created a cycle of antagonism. Draco struck in the dungeons under Snape's protection, Harry fumed helplessly, and the hostility spilled over into hallways, Quidditch matches, and even midnight duels. Without these classroom injustices, their rivalry in the films feels flatter, missing the undercurrent of resentment built up lesson by lesson.